The early 20th century in Venezuela was defined by the relentless extraction of wealth, primarily rubber, known locally as gaucho. This boom dragged thousands into the deep, isolated territories of Guayana, near the Caura River. While fortunes were made in Caracas and abroad, the laborers themselves were trapped in a cruel system of debt bondage, or enganche, which was little more than legalized slavery. They were paid in vouchers only redeemable at the company store, ensuring they could never save enough to leave. This environment, remote, resource-rich, and utterly devoid of regulatory oversight, was a crucible for human suffering, transforming the jungle camps into private fiefdoms ruled by brute force and the absolute power of the overseers, the capataces. It is against this backdrop of institutionalized cruelty that one of the most terrifying events in Venezuelan history would unfold: La Noche de los Machetes. Life in the rubber camps was a harrowing daily trial. Workers faced grueling 12 to 14-hour days, battling not only the suffocating heat and relentless mosquitoes, but also rampant tropical diseases like malaria. Rations were meager, often insufficient to sustain the labor required of them. Cruelty became commonplace, a management tool used by the capataces to enforce impossible quotas. Flogging, starvation, and even summary executions were meted out for minor infractions. The hierarchy was absolute. The white, often foreign-born, management held life and death power over the indigenous laborers and peasant recruits. The resentment simmered beneath the surface like the stagnant water of the rainforest, building pressure until containment was no longer possible. This systemic dehumanization created the perfect psychological conditions for a violent eruption. The specific camp where the rebellion ignited, though details are scarce due to its remoteness, was typical of the era, a cluster of rudimentary thatched roof shelters deep along a tributary of the Caura River. It was isolated by days of dangerous river travel from any significant town, ensuring that any cry for help went unheard and that the power of the owners was unchallenged. The primary weapon and tool of these workers was the machete, essential for clearing the thick undergrowth and scoring the trees to collect the precious latex. Ironically, this ubiquitous tool of labor, used to generate wealth for others, was the only thing the workers possessed that could challenge their masters' firearms. As the abuses intensified, particularly in July 1913, the silent communication among the laborers transitioned from shared pain to coordinated, deadly resolve. While resentment had been mounting for months, the immediate trigger for La Noche de los Machetes appears to have been a final, insupportable act of managerial brutality. Historical accounts suggest it involved the death or brutal torture of a popular or respected indigenous worker who failed to meet his quota, or perhaps the sexual assault of a family member. This specific injustice served as the flashpoint, shattering the laborers' resignation. They realized that their lives were valued less than a day's worth of rubber, confirming that their only path to justice, or simply survival, lay through extreme violence. The decision was not made lightly, but with the grim finality of those who have nothing left to lose. The plan was simple, brutal, and swift: eliminate the entire chain of command in a single, terrifying nocturnal strike. As the oppressive humidity of the jungle night settled in late July 1913, an unnatural silence fell over the camp. The air was thick with tension, palpable only to the conspirators. The soundscape of the night, the buzzing insects, the croaking frogs, masked the low movements of the men preparing their vengeance. Machetes, which had just hours earlier been used to score trees, were now quietly sharpened against stones, their edges honed for a far different purpose. The capataces and administrative staff, complacent in their perceived security, slept soundly, protected only by the vast distances that separated them from civilization. They failed to realize that the danger was not coming from the wilderness, but from the silenced suffering right outside their doors. The darkness was their accomplice, and the humid air carried the scent of impending, desperate bloodshed. The strike was executed with terrifying speed and coordination. In the deepest hour before dawn, the laborers moved as one unit, bypassing guards who were either complicit or quickly overwhelmed. They focused their assault on the barracks and cabins occupied by the overseers, accountants, and anyone representing the managerial authority. The first sounds were muffled, the breaking of wood, the rush of feet, followed by the sudden guttural screams of men waking up to find vengeful figures looming over them. The machete proved to be a devastating weapon in the close confines of the small cabins, requiring no reloading and delivering brutal, terminal force. This was not a riot. It was an efficient, targeted purge of the system's oppressors, fueled by years of pent-up rage that burst forth in a matter of horrifying minutes.
The name, the Night of the Machetes, is a stark testament to the brutality unleashed. The weapons symbolize the inversion of power. The tool of their servitude became the means of their liberation. Historical records confirm the systematic nature of the killing. There were few attempts to take prisoners. The goal was eradication. The laborers ensured that no one who represented the oppressive hierarchy survived to report or retaliate immediately. The massacre was complete and absolute among the administrative staff, leaving the camp littered with victims. This sudden act of extreme violence, though morally complicated, represents the ultimate, desperate response of people pushed past the breaking point, a tragic but inevitable consequence of unchecked power and systemic cruelty in isolated colonial economies. It served as a terrifying warning to other companies operating under similar conditions.
As quickly as the violence began, it ceased. The only sound left was the dripping of moisture from the canopy and the frantic, heavy breathing of the surviving laborers. The silence that followed the massacre was perhaps more terrifying than the screams themselves, weighted by the knowledge of the irreversible deeds committed. There was no going back. Their actions had sealed their fate. Knowing that the official retaliation would be swift, ruthless, and exponentially more violent, the laborers made the immediate decision to vanish. Their sanctuary was the jungle itself. The same impenetrable wilderness that had guarded the rubber operation now offered a perilous form of refuge. They shed their roles as laborers, transforming into fugitives, melting away into the dense, unforgiving green abyss of the Amazonian basin. Days later, the full horror of La Noche de los Machetes was finally discovered. A supply vessel, or a small scouting party, arriving at the camp expecting the usual bustle, instead found a silent, desolate scene. The administrative area was a charnel house, a grim testimony to the ferocity of the uprising. The scale of the violence shocked even the hardened observers of the era. The sight of the bodies, slain by the relentless force of the machetes, instantly broadcasted the message. The workers had revolted and annihilated their masters. The news traveled slowly and circuitously back through the river network to the regional capitals, and eventually to the seat of power in Caracas. The discovery launched a massive regional manhunt, turning the quiet jungle into a theater of military pursuit. The news of the massacre reached the ears of Venezuela's notoriously iron-fisted dictator, Juan Vicente Gómez. Gómez, who ruled through fear and absolute control, saw the event not just as a tragedy, but as a direct challenge to the authority of the state and the economic stability of his regime. His response was immediate and terrifying. Punitive military detachments were dispatched to the region with explicit orders to capture or kill the insurgents. These detachments were often indiscriminate, viewing all indigenous communities and poor jungle inhabitants as potential collaborators. The subsequent hunt turned the Upper Kaur region into a war zone, characterized by torture, displacement, and collective punishment, ensuring that the rebellion's message was drowned out by the sound of official retribution. The price of freedom, even brief, violent freedom, was measured in blood and systemic terror. The ultimate fate of the laborers who executed the massacre remains largely uncertain. Many likely perished in the unforgiving jungle, succumbing to starvation, disease, or the guns of Gómez's soldiers. A few may have successfully integrated into remote indigenous tribes or escaped across borders. However, the exact political impact of La Noche de los Machetes was significant. While the rubber system itself continued, the event served as a chilling deterrent for managers, forcing some companies to slightly temper their most egregious abuses, knowing the depth of the desperation they were fostering. It became a powerful, albeit often suppressed, folk memory, a legend of resistance that illustrated the extreme lengths to which the oppressed would go when all avenues for justice were sealed off. La Noche de los Machetes stands today as a brutal historical marker, a reminder of the human cost exacted by uncontrolled industrial exploitation. It is a story not just of massacre, but of absolute despair met with absolute violence, reflecting the dark confluence of greed, tyranny, and geographical isolation that characterized the early 20th century resource economy in South America. The cries for justice that night were not heard in a courtroom, but expressed through the terrifying arc of a laborer's tool. Although history tends to focus on the powerful, the story of the nameless oppressed who fought back against their servitude remains an essential, tragic element of Venezuela's national narrative. Thank you for joining us as we explored this critical and chilling chapter of history. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates on untold stories and historical documentaries.